let's get to our program. This month, we are proud to present Scott Plum. Scott started his sales career at age 12 in 1987. He founded the Minnesota, that was age 12, not 21. He is that young. Yeah, that was a typo on my screen here. He founded the Minnesota Sales Institute in 2002 to teach salespeople how to increase their closing ratio, generate more revenue, and stop cutting their price to win business. He is Professor Plum and host of the podcast, What Salespeople Need to Know About Selling, and co-host of the weekly podcast, Winning at Selling podcast. And he is the author of Taking Off into the Wind, Creating Lift Out of Life. He is an EBITDA partner and serves clients with on-site classes and workshops, coaching and consulting on value propositions, sales process management, and compensation. Scott has served as president of the Professional Sales Association, PSA, from 2011 to 2014, and the Sales and Marketing Executives from 2014 to 15. With that, I would love to welcome Scott as our guest, and I'm going to spotlight him so that we can.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve. I appreciate it.
And
thanks everybody for joining us today. I want to make the slides available to you. So if you can read this URL, if you go to my website, mnsales.com/reputation-slides, you'll be able to see all of the slides. Don't read ahead, please. And they may look a little different because I took out all the images so that the font would be a little larger on the screen. It'd be easier to read. My goal when I start a class is to make an impact in your presence and have it last and continue in my absence. I also think about a goal that I want to achieve when I'm in your seat and I'm listening to a speaker and I'm dedicating time with them. And my position is when I give you my time, I'm giving you a portion of my life that I will never get back. So please don't make me regret it. So my goal is to deliver a lot of content. We are recording this, so if you want to go through it again, you'll be able to have that information again. I was reminded of a great quote by Harry Crumb that says, "My reputation precedes me. Otherwise, I'd be late for all of my appointments." And sometimes we have to really think about, are we going to be focusing on consistency or are we going to focus on commitment? My word is commitment. I love commitment. And I think if we commit and to be consistent in higher standards versus a reputation of some people are consistent and sometimes are consistently late. And we can always count on them of being consistently late. So really commit to the areas that you want to be consistent in and all supporting the reputation you have. And I really want to stress the reputation. And we're going to start with everything that we talk about internally because it's reflected externally. Sales is an outside job. When you focus on the company inside, it's reflected on what's going on outside. And the actions that the salesperson take represents the company in everything that you do and don't do and how you do it. And it's so important to have an internal focus on how do we want to be represented and reflected externally when it comes to our reputation. We also need to think about what motivates people to change, what motivates them to do something differently. We've got intrinsic motivation, which involves doing something because it's personally rewarding to you, and it's sourced by an internal desire, self-respect, and personal integrity. Now, sometimes if this is not the case, we have this sense of entitlement where people think that they're entitled to something and they don't want to do anything for it. The second type of motivation is extrinsic, which involves doing something because you want an external reward like money or to avoid punishment. The drawback of this is that we start really getting into the carrot and the stick and managing and leading salespeople. So commit to who you are, which is an intrinsic motivation, before what you do, what's an extrinsic motivation. So we always want to concentrate on picking a sales team, doing something because it's the right thing to do. It's sourced by an internal desire of self-respect and personal integrity. And when you're interviewing salespeople, ask them, what makes you tick? Why do you want to be successful? What is your motivation? And find out what it is. There's a myth that salespeople are motivated by money, that I should hire salespeople based on making a lot of money. The problem with that is they will leave for more money. They will take shortcuts, and they might not take into consideration your reputation as a business owner on how are they representing the company in the marketplace every single day. So I want to talk about some challenges, some consistent challenges that are happening in the marketplace because they all have an impact on our reputation. And first is that there's no competitive value proposition. We'll talk a little bit about that. Salespeople are being more reactive than proactive. There's a lack of measurable activities, so we're not managing what we can measure. There's blurred objectives, so we're not really sure what we want to accomplish. And let me just explain objectives a little bit. Is activities are foot on the gas. Objective is hands on the steering wheel. So we can concentrate on a lot of activities, but where are we going with those activities? What's managing the steering wheel? What objectives do we want to concentrate on? And there's a really strong overemphasis on solutions versus uncovering problems. And here's how those areas manifest themselves in a reputation, in the marketplace, in salespeople's behavior, is that salespeople are selling on price. They're losing in competitive situations where they deserve to win. They're sacrificing or they're exercising distracting behaviors. So they're not focusing on what they want to accomplish every single day, and they're getting confused by other distractions that are going on in the marketplace. They're sacrificing profits. So we're cutting the price to win the business. I teach a class on negotiations, but I don't think salespeople should be negotiating because they don't know how to negotiate. They only negotiate by cutting the price, thinking, well, if we cut the price, we'll be able to win the business. That's not the way it works. And they're wasting time on unqualified prospects that are unmotivated to make a decision and purchase. So who is really responsible for this challenge that salespeople are experiencing every day? And I have to think that it's the company leadership and the sales management, because company leadership defines a sales culture every day by what they are willing to tolerate from the sales channel. Leadership decides what they're willing to tolerate and what they're not willing to tolerate. And unfortunately, there can be a lot of sales made within an organization where salespeople are selling excuses to management. Management is then selling those excuses to company leadership, and company leadership is buying it. And it's all based on what leadership and management is willing to tolerate. So some of the areas that we need to really focus on when it comes to leadership and management is when you're onboarding a salesperson or managing salespeople, you really need to define the expectations. Define the expectations in writing. Be clear about expectations as they're added or they're removed when you're working with a sales team and salespeople. And this is so important on onboarding. I really cannot stress the importance of onboarding. It's something that I do. Companies hire me to come in and do the onboarding, set the expectations, focus on the goals, manage the behavior, overcome the objections that prospects have, and really get into the rhythm of what to expect every single day. The second thing is create accountability. So company leadership, sales management has to create accountability. What are you going to do this week? The following week, ask, how did it go? Did you make it? Did you not make it? What prevented you from making it? What distractions did you have to manage in order to stay focused on achieving that goal? And then the third is create consequences. Now, when people think consequences, I mean, the first thing they think of is termination. That's not always the consequence. The consequence may be that maybe we need to invest in some training. Maybe we need to manage some behavior. And sometimes there's this myth that, oh, sales managers want to micromanage me. No, they're not micromanaging you. They're proactively managing you. We're being proactive about where we're focusing our time and how we're trading our time. That is the judgment of salespeople. And I think companies hire salespeople based on one thing, and that is good judgment, because every day a salesperson has got to trade their time for a return. A return is advancing in the sales process, moving the ball down the field, and then eventually getting a sale. And now we're getting a return on investment of time and resources that are allocated to that salesperson. A great quote, I think about this often, is by Henry Ford: you can't build a reputation on what you are going to do. There are a lot of smart people, but they make bad decisions as to how they trade their time. And they really need to focus on, what am I giving up for my time? Is it worth it? Is it a good investment? and to be able to manage. I just think the time is so perishable, and we need to really focus on what are we doing with our time every single day. So let me ask you a question. What reputation do you want in the marketplace? What is your marketplace? So you have to first define what is your marketplace, and then write down 3 words that you want others to use in your absence, to describe your company. And if we just quickly perform that exercise, think of 3 words, write those 3 words. Let me ask you, how unique are those words compared to other companies in your industry, in your marketplace? And that's why I define, what's the marketplace? Where do you want to compete? How are we positioning ourselves in the marketplace? And are they interchangeable with different companies in your industry and your marketplace? And they probably are. So let's focus on what makes you different and better. Too often there's a concentration, and I see this a lot, is, well, here's what makes us different. Well, what makes you different, I will add, doesn't make you better. So if we apply these words into the value proposition you offer, you're going to be hopefully different and better. Our world is different than it was 4 years ago. Is it better or is it different? It's definitely different, but who defines what is better? And I use the word apply intentionally. So how do we apply these words? Some companies differ the value proposition on their specifications. Value is defined by the applications of specs into a benefit now and into the future. It's not about the drill, it's the hole that it delivers. We've all heard that 100 times, more than we want. The value of a product is defined in the application of the product. The value of a service is defined by the application of the service in the marketplace. What does it do? And that's what people are willing to pay for. So when we present what's different, our prospects decide what's better because it's personal. People buy personally, they justify it intellectually. They buy emotionally, they justify it intellectually. So prospects define value and decide what to apply. Our goal is to ask questions to find what's most important, not necessarily what makes us different, but what's most important and how we can present what's most important to give the prospect a better solution so that they define value based on the application of our solution. That's how value is defined. So we get into a value proposition. And let me give you a definition of a value proposition. A value proposition is a promise of value to be delivered, communicated, and acknowledged. It's also the belief of the customer about how value, the benefit, will be delivered, experienced, and acquired. The value proposition can apply to an entire organization or parts thereof, or customer accounts, products, or experiences. That's through Wikipedia. Yes, I am reading some of the slides because some of you folks are doing things different. You're not necessarily watching everything, but maybe you're listening to it. So that's why, and some people learn auditory versus visually or experiencing it. So that's why I read that, because it's important for us to hear some things versus always see them. So value proposition. Here's a definition that I use, and here's how I define a value proposition. Is what does the prospect experience in the absence of the value my solution provides? If they didn't buy from me, what would happen? We can think about car insurance. We can think about homeowners insurance. We can think about what happens if we don't have our phone. What would happen? And now we're deciding how valuable our phone is because we know what the experience is like in the absence of the value the solution provides. So think about what are the financial costs, the business and personal impacts, and the reputation, the consequences. So what is the reputation of a company when the salespeople are not representing the company in the best light to manage a reputation? And that's PAIN. Here's an acronym that came up for PAIN. The first is P for problem. So we need to be able to get our arms around the entire problem. The A is for attributes. So what are the different pieces of that problem that we need to know all about it? We need to be able to get the impact of the problem with the attributes and then transfer that into the numbers or the cost. I'll use an example of when I bought a laptop computer. I went from an XP to a Windows 7 laptop. I went to Costco, I got the laptop, came home, I was going to install software on it. Guess what happened? Software doesn't work. It's a different operating system. Did I have a complete understanding about all of the attributes related to that problem? No, I did not. Did I think that I was going to go out and solve the problem by buying a new laptop? Yeah. Was I misled? Yeah. I misled myself. I thought I knew the answer and I didn't know the answer. I did not have all the information. When people are making decisions, and I say this with regard of a salesperson working with a prospect to make a different decision, is that they have to know all of the attributes related to the problem before they can prescribe a solution. It is possible, if they don't know all the attributes, they create a bigger problem. And that's why it is so important for salespeople to ask questions, to be able to get all the symptoms, to be able to get all of the people involved, and to be able to understand the process of what a company goes through to make a decision. That's getting all of the attributes so that you are able to prescribe the best solution for the company, not to create a bigger problem. So if we look at the impact of the problems, we translate that to a number and a cost. And your price will be compared to their cost. Cost is high, price is low, difference is value. The greater the difference, the greater the value. Too often, salespeople don't really amplify the cost of inaction. What are salespeople competing against all the time? They're competing against one thing: inaction. People and prospects doing nothing. What happens if they do nothing? What is it going to cost them to stay where they are? And then a prospect will compare the cost to your price. The difference is value. It's a math equation. It becomes very easy for them to make a decision. So a value proposition includes your products, services, marketing, branding, and it includes your salespeople. Your salespeople are part of your value proposition, all defining your reputation in the marketplace. Companies can either spend money on sales training, or they can spend money on reputation management through a PR agency. You've all seen companies that experience something bad in the marketplace, and all of a sudden they end up spending a lot of money on PR, hiring a branding campaign or an image campaign or an image consultant, or renaming themselves, and to be able to overcome that reputation. And sometimes there's some salespeople that create a bad reputation in the marketplace, and companies have to decide where are they going to spend their money. Be proactive and spend it on sales training. You're going to get a much greater reward, and you're not going to miss those opportunities in the meantime of having to go through and fix a problem, and you don't know where the problem is because it's related to your reputation.
Hey, Scott.
Yeah.
A question came in.
Please.
What if you have a service that's hard to put into dollar quantifiable? How do you get your arms around something like that where the value of it is less tangible?
I think that probably the easiest way to paint a picture of that is to be able to list past experiences, create a scenario or a story related to how the service was used with somebody else, what happens when they didn't have the service, and when we can create a scenario of consequences when somebody doesn't have the service, we can apply the solution. They stick together. That's how value is defined. And I think that makes it easy for a person to put it in their mind as to how they can apply a service or something that's hard to understand. Hopefully that answers the question. If you could follow up and see if I did a good enough job on that, Steve. Thank you. Feel free to ask the questions as we go. Feel free to interrupt me. I'm here for you. I've got some stuff I'll share with you. If you've got questions, let's talk about it. So the value is, the financial cost, the personal impact, and the reputation. So that really gets into a value proposition. Gets into pricing. Pricing is a real interesting area when it comes to how do we price our product. Now there's two types of pricing. There's cost pricing and there's value pricing. Cost pricing is based on the expenses the seller has, and then they mark it up with a percentage. Value pricing is based on the cost, impact, consequences, the experience of the prospect, and its sale is not made. What happens if the sale is not made? What is the cost? And they're basing their decision on value versus an expense. So too often I see companies that price based on cost, not based on value. If they have a strong value proposition, if they're really able to define their product or service in the marketplace where the prospects are able to see the impact when the solution is applied, that creates value. And sometimes there's more value there than companies are pricing, and it can be more competitive. And the perceived value can be greater, so then prospects think that they're getting more when we look at the pricing. So that's a whole nother conversation, but I just wanted to touch on it briefly.
Hey, Scott,
Yeah.
Another question came in that's very relevant to that slide.
Wonderful.
Would you add implementation or tech support into your value proposition equation?
Yeah, boy, tech support. I remember when WordPerfect was offering unlimited tech support, and I think at the time they were spending $500,000 a month on tech support. That can be something that can be involved in pricing in different levels. I think we've seen some software companies, some SaaS, solution as a software as a solution, price their technical support based on their subscription price. Sometimes we need to look at what are some of the averages and measuring, obviously, the tech support and how much time somebody is spending with our tech support. But sometimes our tech support is also a sales team. And if there's other opportunities to sell when you build a relationship with customers to sell add-ons, sometimes the tech support can be a great sales team as well. But I'm not sure that I'm able to really answer that question as comprehensively as possible, but hopefully I interjected some stuff that maybe can be considered. So,
well, and I think also the pain that the customer feels, that resolution of pain is part of that value, right? And so being able to kind of weave that into your story, I would imagine would be a helpful way of kind of talking about that back end support that's being provided by the company through that service.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, how much would somebody pay just to talk to somebody at Google with a quick question, or even at Microsoft related to your email? How much would you be willing to pay for that? I mean, and some people I think would write out a pretty, sizable check to answer one question. So it gets into what does the solution do and how much is somebody willing to pay for it? A price is always what somebody's willing to pay for it. When you offer a price, when I sold real estate, the house was priced on what somebody was willing to pay for it. Of course, then you had to get into financing, stuff like that, a little trickier, but a price is what somebody's willing to pay for it. So thanks, Steve. Continue to welcome questions. I'll continue with the next slide. So what problems do you solve? Too often, salespeople are so concentrated on solutions that they don't know what problems they solve. So they become problem solvers versus problem finders. We have to be a problem finder. So the problem is in the marketplace is salespeople are taught and trained to be problem solvers when they need to be problem finders. So paint a picture that someone can see in their mind. And that first question, Steve, that came to, how do we describe something as a service that's hard to imagine? Paint a picture in somebody's mind. So here's a picture, here's my picture. Here's what somebody can think about when they think of me, is I work with business owners, invite me into their company to work with their sales people who are experiencing long sales cycles, low closing ratios, shortage of closed sales. Sales managers have missed revenue projections and lost market share, and with plenty of excuses, and the business owners don't know what to do about it or even where to start. So we look at the three types of people that I work with, and I paint a picture as to what can each of them see as to the application of the service that I provide. And I really want to stress work with. I have a problem with the word help. I don't help anybody. I work with them, because when I help somebody, it seems like I'm committed up here, they're committed down here, and then I'm more committed to solving the problems than they are. Have you ever worked with somebody where you're more committed to solving the problems than they are? It gets very frustrating. Help is like enabling somebody to stay where they are, and they're putting all the responsibility on a salesperson to be able to create and fix it. Now, don't get me wrong. We have to serve. We need to commit. We need to deliver. But there's sometimes we need information. And when we're working with somebody, we're mutually committed to a mutual goal. So the goal is defined. We're mutually committed to it, and we're working together to get there in the time allocated to it. Helping can be frustrating.
So Scott, another question came in on this very topic.
Great.
What if the prospect really can't define their problem? How do you weave a story around a problem that's really opaque in their mind? And a lot of times they really can't articulate it, or maybe they don't have exposure to all of the issues that helps them define what that problem is. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. Hopefully the experience of the salesperson and the application of a solution and past experiences is going to be able to determine what questions to ask, what direction to take the prospect in. And I really want to stress the importance of intense and extensive active listening. Intensively listening and extensively listening. So intensively going deep, extensively going wide, and really commit to listening. I've been following the trial, the George Floyd trial, or Derek Chauvin trial, and the questions that the attorneys are asking is only based on listening to the witness. During the voir dire process, the 2 weeks that took, listening to the questions that the attorneys were asking, all based on the answers that the jurors were giving them. It was an exercise in active listening. By that you mean, could you give me an example? Why did you do that? How did you feel? What made you feel that way? And really getting into all of the information, and it's really the intent behind the content. So when we're asking questions, we're listening for answers, and we're finding out more about the intent. So hopefully that answers the question, Steve. Thank you. So the problem ownership, when we think about finding problems, we need to think about who owns the problems. So owners, in the value proposition, they don't know where to start. Owners of companies go, I want to increase my revenue. I don't know where to start. In some cases, it's the sales culture. Some cases, it's the entire sales channel. Some cases, it's the sales process. Some cases, it's the strategy that a company has when it comes to sales. And sometimes it's the sales techniques. Too often, I see companies get into sales techniques before they get into strategy. Sometimes they get into sales tactics before they get into strategy. We really need to define sales strategy in order to deliver on the techniques and tactics. And that gets into managing behavior and skill development. So what are we doing every day to be able to improve the results that we're getting to get a better outcome when we do the next day over? Management, missed revenue projections. So they lost market share and plenty of excuses from the salespeople as to why we didn't do it. Salespeople, long sales cycles, low closing ratios, lack of closed sales. Maybe they had to cut the price to win the business. These are all problems within the 3 areas that I work with in the sales channel and the sales culture. So when we're selling to an individual, there may be other people involved. Gosh, I thought I turned that off. Or maybe it was off and I turned it on. So getting into the problems that people have. So let's recap so far. The value proposition is the foundation of delivering value in a competitive marketplace, so products and services. Company leadership and sales management define the culture by what they are willing to tolerate from the salespeople. And now I want to talk about developing your sales team. So we talked a little bit about proactive versus reactive. What is a perfect fit? Too often I see salespeople going out and saying, well, I sell to everybody. Well, no, you don't really sell to everybody. There has to be a perfect fit. So list 3 things that make up a perfect fit. Looking back at your perfect prospect, your perfect client, list 3 attributes that describe them. And too often salespeople are waiting for somebody to call them when they should be calling the best prospects. So this is the start of building a proactive leadership reputation in the marketplace. Is what is a perfect fit? How are we going out and introducing ourselves to them? How are we approaching them? And then talking about relative and relevant information between the two, that gets to be a perfect fit. Perfect fit is going to be able to shorten your sales cycle, increase your closing ratio, and not get tempted to cut the price to win the business because you are delivering the best value to a perfect fit. You cannot deliver the best value to a misfit. They don't see the value because they don't understand the application of the solution because they can't relate to the problems of a perfect fit. So really identify what is a perfect fit. Proactive versus reactive. What does a perfect week look like? Too often, I ask a salesperson, what is a perfect week? Well, it depends. I said, it depends on what? I said, who's in charge of your time? Who's in charge of how you trade your time? Are you working on a list or a to-do list? Are you being active but not productive? Every day, every week, you are trading your time and making good time trades. Are you building a proactive leadership reputation in the marketplace by a perfect week? If you were in charge of your time, what a perfect week look like? Don't tell me what happened. Tell me what's going to happen. Too often salespeople say, well, it really depends. Depends on what? Depends on what happens. Who decides on what happens? Are you waiting for something to happen? That's customer support. That's customer service. They're waiting for something to happen. Salespeople have to go out and make things happen and to be proactive versus reactive. What are you measuring? You cannot manage what you cannot measure per week. I will stress per week. Too often companies get into monthly goals. Monthly goals are important, but we need to manage weekly behavior to get to monthly goals. Too often they do quarterly goals. A quarter is too long to fix anything. And for sure, a year is way too long. It's just too long to do anything proactively. You have to, goals on month, activities on week. How did you do that week? By the end of the second week, you should be at about 60 to 65% of your goal. You're on a good track to be able to hit your goal and pass it. So some things to measure: new versus existing customers, incoming versus outgoing, appointments to proposals. How many appointments did you make? How many proposals did you do? Proposals to commitments. Where's the source of the leads? How's the lead mix coming in? Are you diversified with getting leads in? Product mix, the objectives. What do we want to sell within different products within the company? Sometimes one product can make a sale to another product. So we want to be able to really sell that lead product to be able to sell another product. Entry versus enterprise products, and the diversity of industries. And I think in this last year, we've seen really the importance of diversity within industries that we serve. If you were selling to restaurants, nightclubs, concerts, well, you saw one publication that didn't make it. They had closed up shop because that's who all of their advertisers were. And they were on a business and they packed it up. So really concentrate on how diverse are we within the industries that we serve. So here are some of the objectives that I wanted to cover when it comes to challenges: no competitive value proposition, reactive versus proactive, lack on measurable activities, blurred objectives, and an overemphasis on solutions and uncovering problems. And they manifest in selling on price, losing in competitive sales situations when you know you should have won, exercising distracted behavior, sacrificing profits, and wasting time on unqualified and unmotivated prospects. So we can see the challenges, we can see how they manifest themselves. Too often a company will invite me in and say, Scott, hey, can you come and work with my salespeople? They have a closing issue. And I say, sure, I'd love to do that. I spend about 90 minutes with each salesperson. I ask them questions that take up about 4 sheets of paper. And when I come back and talk with the ownership of the company, and I say, I did not find necessarily a closing problem. I found an opening problem. Opening conversations, approaching more prospects, asking more questions, defining a perfect fit, being more proactive versus reactive, not measuring their time and their drive time, and they end up driving. They make a star all over the Twin Cities. Like, well, I go down here and then I go down here and I go no. Let's book 3 weeks out, and on this particular Wednesday we're going to spend in Woodbury, and we're going to be able to accomplish 8 appointments in Woodbury in one day versus handling 3 appointments in one day because you're driving all over town. I mean, let's think about how are we measuring our activities and drive time. And then they manifest, the challenges are in other areas. And we find a lot out during that time to be able to focus on the opening problem, the prospecting, the being more proactive, etc. So here's a perfect approach: is first of all, stop helping people, start working with them. When you're working with them, you're equal to them. People like to use the word partner. Okay, partner. Sometimes a partner is like, well, I can't pay my bill this month because I don't have enough revenue. But we did the service and we delivered the product. Yeah, but I thought we were partners. And partners end up kind of sharing some of the, when there's no cash flow, it's a partnership. So we both don't get paid. So that ain't going to work, is it? Don't be assumptive. Too often, salespeople think that their solution is perfect for everybody, and they go out and they talk about their solution and they don't find a problem. Solutions have no value unless they stick to a problem. Not everybody's willing to change. Not everybody thinks that your solution is applicable to them. They don't take control, or they take away from the prospect also. So helping can also take control away from a prospect. You're helping them, you're taking over, you're taking the lead. Prospects get defensive and they go, wait a minute, I don't want to lose control, and I don't want a salesperson that's assumptive. So prospects want to be in control, and they want to work with somebody to solve a problem together so the prospect knows what's happening. That can be a very good approach. And then stop fighting salespeople on price, and then also sharing information. So if prospects are guarded, they're not going to share as much information. So give 3 scenarios on how you work with them and how you can solve the problems, and go out there and be a problem finder and not a problem solver. And stop leading with price. That's one of the biggest challenges that I see, is that salespeople turn their own product into a commodity because they lead with price. And a good question to ask a prospect is, and I assume when you're making a decision like this, you're going to make the decision based on the best value and not necessarily the cheapest price. Is that a safe assumption? And now you're going to get the frame of mind on looking for value and not just price. Uncover the cost, consequences, and risk. So when we're working with somebody, if we don't really focus on what happens if they don't do something, what are they going to experience, because value is defined by what the prospect experiences in the absence of the value your solution creates, then they're able to weigh the risk that they want to take if they don't buy from you. And then, goal to be to lead with the solution. So your goal is to lead with the solution instead of lead with the solution. So lead to the solution, not lead with the solution. So we need to take them to the solution, not lead with the solution. So how I work with companies, just a brief breakdown, is when it comes to leadership, I work on consulting, work on the reputation, the value proposition, culture, and compensation. Management teams I work with on coaching, creating experiences, objectives, accountability, sales price, and salespeople, training, working with them to become advocates, work on their activities, being proactive, and then work on their skills and tools that they can use in the marketplace. So your sales team represents your reputation and is the foundation of your value proposition. I'm going to start wrapping up here. There's a great quote by Anthony Iannarino. He wrote the best sales guide you only need. He's really a leader in the industry of developing salespeople. I really have a high regard and high respect for him. So he says the recurring problem in generating and capturing new opportunities seems to fall into 2 categories. The first is the lack of relevance, something that plagues salespeople who have not adopted the modern sales approach. And second is the lack of agility necessary to deal with the sales conversation that is a complex and nonlinear process or nonlinear sale. So it's the lack of relevance and the lack of agility for salespeople. And just a reminder of different ways to learn more information that I offer. I work with Bill Hellkamp on a website, on a podcast. Winning at Sales podcast comes out every week. So winningatselling.com. And then I also do one called What Salespeople Need to Know About Selling. One of my, on the second one, the podcast, there's 2 episodes that I think you'll be able to get a lot of information out of. Reasons salespeople or sales departments fail, and then 3 complete opposites. So you can search Professor Plum and you'll be able to find that. Some action items. Again, I did a book on taking off into the wind, and it's written for a person who is selling, not necessarily a salesperson. I define a salesperson as a person who has an impact on the experience and an influence on the outcome. And if you're in that position, which most people are, that's what the book is written for. You can go to my website, mnsales.com, to purchase it. I believe there are 2 types of salespeople. There's a salesperson who loves selling, and there's a salesperson that loves what they sell. So when you're interviewing people, when you're talking to salespeople, ask them, find out which one are they, and it's going to make it a lot easier for you to work with them. Thanks for having me today. We've got some time. It's about 1:45. Wow, I rushed through that. And I welcome any questions, any comments, any feedbacks. Thanks for joining me, and hi to everybody that I know and joined us today. So Steve, I'll turn it over to Q&A.
Scott, it's good that you got to the end here. We've got a number of questions that are coming out of the audience. So you generated some real
uncomfortable silence.
Yeah.
Well, nobody asked any questions.
One of the questions.
And hopefully we still have it.
Yeah. Well, we've got some
hopefully we're still on the air.
We have some philosophical and we have some practical ones. I guess one that came up that's
still on the air
is in a rapidly changing economy, contacts leaving, etc. How many points of contact within a prospect do you recommend?
Check my phone.
Hey, Scott, can you hear me okay? Scott, can you hear me? Scott, can you hear me okay? All right, we seem to be having a technical issue here.
We still there,
Scott,
Steve? Oh.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Shoot. Okay, try it again.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yeah, my speaker went dead. What did I miss?
Okay. I was wondering why it created an odd interaction, so I wasn't sure.
Oh, were you asking questions?
Yeah, I was talking.
Oh,
so,
God.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Hey, this is life in the COVID economy, everybody. We're going to be talking about that next month. All right, so we've got some philosophical, more kind of broader strategic questions and some tactical ones. One is, with the constant change and churn that's happening in organizations, how do you recommend keeping contact? How many contacts within a prospect? How do you nurture that relationship when you have a changing cast of characters because of what's happening in the economy?
Ooh, so a cast in characters, it could be the prospects, it could be the salespeople. So either one of them is changing over. I think the importance is to maintain top of mind awareness. I like to position salespeople as market ambassadors. So if you think of a salesperson as a market ambassador, what is the goal of a market ambassador? The goal of a market ambassador is to share information with their marketplace, to be the person that prospects call when they have questions related to a product or service within a certain topic or industry, the salesperson's area, and to work on delivering market information and not always concentrate on product information. Too often salespeople get really caught up in their own solutions. They drink their own Kool-Aid when there's a marketplace going on and there's information that's happening in the marketplace that's relevant to prospects. And if you're the ambassador and you're constantly delivering that information to prospects, prospects are going to turn to you every time it comes to a topic related to that particular subject. I know a guy, some of our listeners know a guy named John Francis. John Francis's nickname is Johnny Franchise. Anytime I hear the word franchise, anybody say franchise, that's John Francis, I got to introduce them to John Francis. They got to meet John Francis. And I call John Francis and I introduce him. That's the reputation that John Francis has. So be a market ambassador, share information related to the marketplace, and stay in touch with everybody. I think once every 3 weeks is a good time without really sucking up all of their energy. So thanks.
Great, thank you. Earlier, a question came in referencing Donald Miller, who recommends looking for external, internal, and philosophical problems that need to be uncovered and solved. And so this came in when we were talking about that idea that, hey, maybe the prospect can't define their problem or answer the why behind your probing questions. So thoughts on that idea from Donald Miller? That
book, I've got it, Building Story Brand. It's a great book. There's a lot of content in there. That's a bit of a vague question. I always find scenarios and situations where a product is used to be most beneficial. The challenge that a lot of people have when it comes to a solution is they don't understand the application. They don't understand how it's incorporated into their daily lives, how it affects them personally, what would happen if they had it, what would happen if they didn't have it. So really concentrating on the application of the solution and not necessarily selling the specs, but to talk about the benefits of the specs and the application of it. So thank you.
Yeah, and I would imagine that the philosophical aspect of this, right? I hadn't thought about that. How do you dig into philosophical problems that they might be having, and that's underlying kind of what's happening in that organization or with their challenges in their sales team. So it's an interesting way of framing it up. So I appreciate the reference to that other author. Another couple of questions that have come in here. What would you describe as the elements of a successful sales culture?
Boy, if every day that happened, you'd want to do it again. If you see that you're constantly gaining market share, your attitude and enthusiasm within salespeople is positive and proactive. You're seeing a really refined sales process where people are turning things over quickly, and they're starting to see more expansion in the marketplace and more buzz and more recommendations and referrals from their existing customers. I think a great question that a salesperson can ask their existing client or customer is, I'm kind of curious, how do you define what I do? And when a salesperson asks a customer that, you're going to get a really interesting answer. It's something that you probably are not able to project or anticipate, but it's really going to tell you the impact that you make on their life.
You know, you've probably seen this too, Scott. You know, you have it's like the sales culture is what it's willing to tolerate. You know, that idea that you were talking about earlier on. I've seen organizations that have really toxic people, you know, really arrogant people who think that they kind of run the place because they're the big guns bringing in the revenue, and it gets in the way of being able to apply accountability and discipline and kind of the structure that you were talking about that drives positive outcomes from sales. So that's just a question that I have is, how do you deal with those kind of big personalities that are hard to quote unquote manage? And how do you channel that energy and that ego in a way that's going to kind of fit and build a culture versus tear it down?
Yeah, there's two movies that come to mind when we talk about this. Miracle on Ice, when they were forming the Olympic team, they kicked off two of the senior players from the team, and that made the rest of the team stronger. Moneyball, same thing. They took two players that were really good and they didn't put them on the team, and they made the rest of the team stronger. And it's a culture where, you know, you want them to all work together, but you also want them to be somewhat competitive in a friendly competition too, but to be able to be unified as a group too.
Yeah. Somebody quick asked, what's the title of Anthony Iannarino's book?
It's the only sales guide you'll need to know or have. But if you look up Anthony Iannarino, he's got 3 books, and that one is very good. My copy's at home. So
could you repeat what you think the title is?
The Only Sales Guide You'll Need.
Okay.
The Only Sales Guide You'll Need. Yeah.
All right. And then we also got a question. Do you also do one-on-one coaching in addition to the other services that you listed?
I do. My coaching program is working on establishing 3 goals to begin with, and then figuring out the techniques, the beliefs, the behavior, the attitude that we need to have to accomplish those 3 goals. So if you have 3 goals, you want to accomplish them within a certain amount of time, we can talk about how the coaching program works. I just want to avoid therapy sessions because sometimes we can get into complaining about stuff, and I don't mind doing that, but I really want to focus on the goals.
Well, when you're in sales and business development, you need therapy every once in a while.
Yes,
so
yes,
you go somewhere else for that. Yeah. So another question that popped up, how do you manage the relationship between sales and marketing, that dynamic of turfism between the two, and how do you kind of deal with that and get those things working as twin engines versus opposite thrusters?
Wow. Yeah, twin engines, counter rotating props. There's a reason they call them divisions, is because they are divided. my definition of marketing is everything that occurs before a prospect identifies themselves to a salesperson. At that point, a salesperson takes over the conversation. Another example is that marketing can really be, air support to boots on the street is another association. But I think the collaboration between the two is really working on listening to each other on what's going to be most valuable. And I think salespeople have a tremendous opportunity to be able to find out what marketing is working by asking just some very simple questions about what made you decide to call today, or what do you know about our company, or tell me what you've learned about our solutions, so that you can really find out what's in the prospect's mind when it comes to branding and market presence, so that you can start there. And sometimes you might have to start with some clarification and misconceptions before you can really have a concrete conversation. And then that's good information to share with marketing. Also, salespeople can share the competitive situations in the marketplace because they are in the trenches to marketing as to how marketing can help support them, with the air support. Hopefully that's helpful.
All right, thank you. How would Scott recommend managing Zoom sales calls? How have you found success in managing that difficult dynamic, Scott?
I really like to keep it short. I worked with one company and I did daily Zoom calls, and with a small sales team, and I pretty much asked them, what are you going to do today? What did you do yesterday? And what do you need help with? Those are the three questions that I really concentrated on. And the point is for them to be able to have that sense of camaraderie and sharing information, to be able to ask for help when they need it, so you're able to give them the skill development, but also to really reinforce that accountability as to what did you do yesterday? What are you going to do today? And if you just keep repeating that, and you can do that within 15 or 20 minutes every single day without taking up a lot of their time, but you're really creating that accountability for salespeople. And then the salespeople can be proud to come to the Zoom meeting and say, hey, this is what I said I was going to do, and I did it, and I feel great, and my attitude's fabulous because I did it. If we commit to the behavior, our attitude will follow. Too often we focus on attitude, but we don't do anything. We walk around, saying I've got a bluebird on my shoulder and everything's great, but we don't do anything. Let's do something. Thanks.
How about with the prospects? How would you suggest you deal with that dynamic, which is very different online than it is in person?
I think prospects are easier to get a hold of now. However, we don't make that time interesting and valuable for them, where they're going to learn something after the interaction. If we can project and define and then share with them what's in it for them and what benefit they would get when the call is over with, and keep them short, 15 minutes, but put them in 30 minutes increments, so that if they do go long, you still have more time if the prospect does. But the prospects are overwhelmed with people who want to take their time. Oh, thank you so much for taking the time. No, the prospects want to know what's in it for them. So we can say, I really appreciate you setting some time aside. And at the end of our conversation, here are some of the things that I want to accomplish. What are some things you want to accomplish? So have an agenda. And when the prospects are able to talk with a market ambassador that has information that they want to have, they're willing to allocate time as long as they can exchange information to make it worthwhile for both sides.
Scott, what do you do when you've got that prospect who says, not quite ready, let's talk in another 3 months? What do you feel is an effective way of keeping that relationship?
I understand that's not uncommon. I hear that often. I'm just kind of curious, what would be different in 3 months? Because if we were able to make a difference today, that would make a difference in 3 months, we'd be 3 months ahead. So is it okay if I just ask you a couple of questions and then determine if now would be a better time than in 3 months or not? I can certainly understand if there's not the time or the resources to make a change right now, but what happens if there's not a time or change to happen right now? Mm-hmm. When I sold advertising, it seems like I always get the objection, well, we made our budget already. I said, well, if there was a better solution that came out after your budget was already determined, would you want to hear about it? Or would you just want to continue to drive off the cliff? Because there might be something better out there, and that would be the purpose of my time. I'll keep it short. I promise to be brief. And if there's no interest, at least we can follow up later on.
Great.